To the best of our knowledge, very, very few current Canadian members of Parliament have volunteered to leave their jobs in politics and go fight on a far-off battlefield. The same could be said for any provincial legislature in this country as well. And it's surely a tiny number of politicians' children who have also enlisted in the military. But 100 years ago, that was certainly not the case, as current and future politicians heard the call to fight for king and country and went off to fight in supposedly the war to end all wars. Patrice Dutil is co-author of Embattled Nation, Canada's Wartime Election of 1917, and he joins us now with more. I wanted us to have a chance to talk about the distinction between the way that our political leadership today views serving in the military and the way it would have 100 years ago, the election in which you were writing about this book. There were a lot of politicians who served back then. They left politics and they fought. How come?
Well, this was king and country, and it's the English Canadians, British-born. There aren't too many people who go fight, though, Steve. There's one MP who will go and die. He'll die at the front. The member for Brome, and I forget his name.
I think it's George Baker.
George Baker.
And there's a statue of him in the lobby.
In the lobby, yes.
In Parliament.
Yes. And he's the only one. But there are many children. Rodolphe Lemieux, Wilfrid Laurier's closest collaborator, will lose a son in 1917. And it's devastating. These guys did feel the sting. And they also had, but there was also an opposite kind of story. French Canadians who wanted to fight. And who were denied the opportunity, who were denied the opportunity to climb the hierarchy of the military command, and that had a huge impact on the war effort in Canada, in French Canada also. I mean, if you want to raise troops, you want to raise enlistment, you should demonstrate that that Francophones will be welcome to serve in their language. And the government of Canada adamantly refused to do that. There's the Vendus, as you guys say,
yes, yeah.
That was very successful. But the other regiments that were raised were all broken up, deployed into smaller regiments, English-speaking. The government of Canada had the opportunity to do that. They did not do that.
Well, according to your book, 24 MPs, sitting MPs, enlisted. We mentioned George Baker, who fought and died. William Hearst, Premier of Ontario, had 2 sons who fought.
Yes.
Future premiers, Leslie Frost, yes, and Mitchell Hepburn and George Drew fought in World War I.
Lester Pearson.
Lester Pearson fought in World War I. John Diefenbaker, for a little while as well, fought
yes,
in World War I.
Yes.
I mean, this kind of military service today by our political leaders is unimaginable.
Well, and this brings to mind the kind of candidates that ran in 1917. You have a massive number of former soldiers who run in the 1917 election. That's the difference. And they'll run mostly for the conservative, for the unionist label. And that's undeniable. And the parliament that's elected as a result of the 1917 election has a remarkable khaki look to it. There's a lot of former members of the military who are in there. The only liberal, however, is Chubby Power from Quebec. Who came back from the front, ran in Quebec riding, and was elected. He's the only liberal in Quebec with a military background. But for the rest of it, yes, absolutely. There are many people running in the election with military service under their belt, and they are elected. It's a big difference.
Interestingly enough, the 2 main political leaders in the country at the time, Robert Borden, the Prime Minister, Wilfrid Laurier, the leader of the opposition, neither had children.
Yes.
Was there a suspicion then that they somehow didn't have skin in the game?
A lot, people did accuse them of that. There were many other people in the cabinet that were like that, that did not have children old enough, who had no children. Thomas White, the Minister of Finance, also was in a similar situation. R.B. Bennett did not have children, and he was never a member of cabinet. He was a prominent conservative, and he didn't run against Borden. He did not join the unionist cause because he didn't believe in it at all. But many people like that did not have children, and of course it adds to the opposition. For those people who say, well, you don't have children, why are you asking us to serve?
It's interesting, in the United States today, military service is still considered a great ticket to becoming a politician. Very much so.
Yeah.
It's interesting how it isn't in Canada. I mean, we have, the Minister of Defense, Harjit Sajjan, is a well-decorated war.
Indeed, and he's exceptional
war veteran
in that regard.
Yeah.
I don't think there's ever been anybody like that.
Nope. But interestingly enough, the father of the current Prime Minister chose not to serve in World War II, and electors didn't hold it against him.
Yes. And certainly a lot of people accused him of that and reminded us of that, but it was not held that way. Canada does not have the militaristic tradition of the United States, and Trudeau père had other things that spoke on his behalf. And in 1968, the war was 25 years before. People did not want to talk about the Second World War, so that was not held against him. We don't have that American tradition, and certainly Quebec does not have that tradition. Pointed to as the reason why French Canadians were not volunteering in the same degree as English Canadians, that there was no military tradition in Quebec, that this idea of serving in Europe was completely contrary to people whose ancestors had arrived 200 years before. So I mean, the whole idea of war experience was new for Canada, and it's still not, doesn't sit very well with us.
No, we're very removed from it today. I know, for example, I think Leslie Frost still had shrapnel in him from having served in World War I. John Robarts had served in World War II on a Navy ship.
Leslie Frost would go to Civil War battlefields for his summer holidays. he still had that military cast of mind. George Drew, similar thing, leader of the Conservatives. And we don't have that. We don't have that tradition here. And to this day, I mean, you look at the opinion polls on Canada's military, and Canadians still don't really buy into the idea of Canada as a military power. I've seen polls that ask Canadians about defending the far north, and they say, no, I'm not really interested in defending the far north. It's just too far. It's not something that sticks to their daily life, that they see any value in it. So fundamentally, the current government has again dropped military expenditures, and Canadians are not speaking up against that.
More on this, and of course, the great wartime election of 1917, one of the most consequential in Canadian history, all in Patrice's new book, along with David Mackenzie, called Embattled Nation. Thanks, Patrice.
Thank you very much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.